like using generative AI for the candidate is cheating. So we'll delve into that straight away. I'm joined today by Martin Redstone, founder at Peoplebot, Robert Newry, CEO and co-founder at Arctic Shores, Mark Whitehead, Senior Product Manager and Assessment Lead at the Adecco Group, and Gemma Aldridge, Head of Talent Acquisition UK and Ireland for Siemens. Welcome, everybody. AI is everywhere. It's a buzzword of 2023. And generative AI tools are already fundamentally changing how candidates apply for jobs. We want to get an authentic view into a candidate's potential as recruiters. Just before I hand over to Robert Newry, just a little bit of housekeeping for you all. As I say, we have the polls running, so please do have a look at those. And also, we'd love your questions and comments. We will have some questions for the panel, but if you have any comments, always feel free to share those. It's lovely to see that discussion. So now let's get kicked off. Over to you, Robert. Welcome.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. You're really pleased to be on this panel with Martin, Gemma and Mark. So I'm Robert Newry, CEO and co-founder of Arctic Shores, and we have a sort of unique perspective, I suppose, on the change that Gen AI is going to make on recruitment and selection, because the way that we understand people is through tasks. So we've always had this fundamental approach and belief that understanding people by what they do rather than asking them questions how they might do things is a great way to uncover potential. And we now have the world of Gen AI, which is providing both a really interesting and productive and efficient way to help recruiters on the one hand, and then on the other, what does it mean for candidates, and how is it going to level the playing field? How is it going to help us understand differences between candidates too? And so before we sort of kick off to the panel, I'm just going to share a little bit of research that we have uncovered over the summer, based on talking to 2,000 different candidates, and a couple of other perspectives just to set the scene for this discussion. So the interesting thing is that we have a Greenhouse, I think, discovered that 89% of recruiters are now using ChatGPT or Gen AI on a regular basis. So everybody on this call will be largely regularly using it. But the bit that I don't think many people have properly thought through is, well, how are candidates using it? And what does it mean now that candidates have an incredibly powerful tool for which to enhance and support their application? So some of the stats here that we found in a bit of research too, this is the positive side of it. So 23% of people from a Black heritage background, mixed heritage background, we're using ChatGPT on a regular basis to apply for jobs, compared to 19% of other ethnicities. So you can see in some of these stats here, you've got higher usage amongst the neurodiverse community in using ChatGPT, because, and this is my contention, that ChatGPT is like a calculator. It is something that you can use to support and level the playing field. And I think it's particularly true people who are dyslexic or dyspraxic, not having their CVs or applications ruled out simply because they made a spelling mistake. And so it's obvious as to why Gen AI can be really helpful to those that might need a little bit of extra support. So that's on one side. Candidates see it positively, see it as a way of being able to level the playing field. But there is a number of other things that we need to be aware of when we're thinking about how to encourage or discourage the use of Gen AI in the application process. You've got a lot of people that just can't afford the best version of ChatGPT, which is ChatGPT-4, because it's behind a paywall. And our research showed that ChatGPT-4, and there's plenty of other research out there, significantly outperforms the free version, ChatGPT 3.5, in terms of the language, its ability to reason, and therefore enhance somebody's application. So we have some real challenges to think about here, and whether candidates are using ChatGPT in the right way or the wrong way is not something that recruiters and people on this call can just sit back and wait for candidates to work out. The education sector went down that route, and they discovered pretty quickly that you've got to be on the front foot on all this. You've got to give advice. You've got to be indicating to people as to how you expect them to be using Gen AI in the application process because of these type of nuances. But it is also something that every employer has to be working on now. The number of tools that are coming out now, and here's just a few of them, that enable people to enhance their CV. One of my favorites is, I think it's called lazyapply.ai, which means that while you sleep, AI will be customizing your CV and application to 4,000 different job adverts that it finds on Reed or Indeed or some of the other CV library job boards. And you can wake up in the morning to see, probably much to your surprise, the different things that AI has now applied for you. But it does mean that people are going to get inundated now with applications. And it's going to be really challenging to decide, okay, what's real and what is just AI enhanced on this. And so this is something that has to be really thought about now. There's a real tsunami coming along of applications. And you don't have to just take my word for it. Here's just some of the things a couple of comments that we've picked up from some of our clients talking about what they are seeing. And last week, actually, I was talking to the head of TA professional services firm, who said that video interviews now, almost half of them, candidates were just reading a response from ChatGPT. And so it's becoming really, really difficult now to be able to decide, okay, well, what do we do in that circumstance? Are they reading it because they're neurodivergent and it's help, or are they reading it because they're lazy? Are they reading it because they can't be bothered? Are they reading it because actually it's an incredibly helpful way for them to articulate what they would like to say? So these are things that are really challenging for us, and there are no necessarily right or wrong answers around all of this, but we do have to sort of talk it through and think it through. And this is the last piece, I think, as we then sort of head out to the broader channel on this one, which is, what is the response going to be from the employers and recruiters and the TA profession? We've got three different options here. We can say that Gen AI is something that we want to deter and tell people not to use it, and there are a few employers that have chosen that approach. Then there are others, largely pursued by the traditional assessment community, which is to detect it and say, oh yeah, we've found out that you're using Gen AI, that is what we consider to be cheating, and therefore we're going to screen you out. There are challenges, and we'll talk about those as we sort of go through the session today with both those approaches. But from a more positive point of view, I think we find ourselves at a tremendous pivot point in recruitment, where we have an opportunity to fundamentally rethink how we recruit. What do we want to measure? How do we want to measure, and why do we want to measure it? These are questions we should be asking ourselves now that we've got an opportunity to really rethink how we go about determining who is the best fit for the tremendous roles that many of us are making available to candidates. So on that note, and hopefully sets the scene, and be very interesting to hear what the poll results are, I'll hand back over now to you, Jenny, to kick off the rest of the discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Robert. I'm sure people have got lots of questions coming into their brains as we speak, and it's been very interesting actually. And just before we do the results of that poll, just to let everyone know, there's a second poll running, which is: do you understand how candidates are using Gen AI in your current selection process? So do feel free to look at that one as well. But if we jump into the results, so the question was: do you consider candidate use of generative AI cheating? Out of 38 responses, 5 people were a yes, 14 people were a no, and then 50%, 19 votes, said, I'm not sure, which I think you may find quite interesting because there's that kind of the very firm 5 yeses, this is cheating. And then a lot of people are saying, actually, I'm not sure. So I think to start us off, very quickly over to each of you in turn would be to say sort of, are you on the fence about this? Do you feel very strongly it is or it isn't? Or and do you kind of relate to those people who are kind of going, actually, I don't know? Robert, I'll go to you first. What would be your response to that?
Well, I'm very clear about this. It is not cheating. It's a calculator. I look to the education world now, who started off with the view that it was cheating, quickly realized that everybody's using it. And I also think you just have this challenge that if everybody in every organization is saying, yes, we want to using Gen AI in the way that we work, how on earth do you say, yeah, no, it's cheating when you apply for the job, but when you come into the company,
yes,
we're going to say, this is brilliant, we want you to be using it. And they're just going to go, hang on, how does this all work?
Yeah, so absolutely.
That's my starting point.
Lovely. Martin, what do you feel about this? Cheating, not cheating? Not sure.
I'm 100% with Robert on this one. It's not cheating as far as I'm concerned. We wouldn't accuse an accountant of using a spreadsheet and cheating. So this is my thought process. I'm not surprised at those results at all. I think most people take this answer from really what the corporate stance is, and I really do think the corporate stance is in line with that, where I don't think anyone's really, as a majority, put their flag in the sand and decided what we're going to do about this. And I think that's the biggest challenge we will have as an industry moving into 2024, is that companies really do need to make a decision very, very quickly. I'm glad that out of the ones that voted yes or no, the smaller percentage was no, it's not cheating. But no, I'm absolutely categorically clear that as far as I'm concerned, this is not cheating whatsoever.
Ooh, so two very much not on the fence there. Mark, what would you like to add there?
I'm not in that camp, I'm afraid. So it's a really difficult one. I would never say that it is unilaterally cheating to be using a tool to give you some advantage where you may have had a disadvantage. So Robert, you talked really well about neurodivergent candidates who really benefit from having tools that can help them to structure responses that will make sense to employers. That being said, anything that anybody can use to give themselves an unfair advantage could be thought of as cheating. I mean, if you think about sports, just because everyone's doping doesn't mean it isn't cheating, right? So I think there is like a counter argument here to be had. That being said, there's always been this cheating conversation going on in talent acquisition, in assessment. 10, 15 years ago, it was when we had unsupervised online tests coming into the market. And you had that risk of, is it cheating to have your mum or dad sat with you doing a verbal test, for example? So it's a problem that hasn't gone away. And I think this is the new version of it. I think just like unsupervised online testing was back in the day, it's going to be impossible to prevent it. And I think the responsibility for employers is to take steps to mitigate the risk of people giving themselves an unfair boost. I think that's where I sit on the fence. I'm probably with the majority on the poll.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, yes, it does take me back to the idea of when, and I might be showing my age here to people that are listening, but when you used to send off a cover letter. So you kind of say, well, yeah, if I get a friend to read my cover letter when on a printout, same thing, really. You could take it sort of back that far, couldn't you? But Gemma, what would you like to add to that? Cheating, not cheating, or not sure?
That was a great counter argument, wasn't it? I'm firmly on the side of not cheating.
Okay.
And I think my view on this is we were taught from a very, very young age that, writing a fantastic CV is the window of opportunity into an organisation. So you'd get your mum to write it, your dad to write it, your friend who's really good at English, anybody to help you write that. So is that cheating? So is using ChatGPT the same thing, or is it a tool to help you articulate yourself better than you can? So I'm a big advocate of use it and use it to its advantage, but have a robust process that helps to differentiate a good candidate over a not great fit candidate.
We love that. Goodness me. So lots of different opinions there, and that's what we want on a panel discussion. So thank you. Keep them coming, everybody. That leads us really nicely, Gemma, into our first panel question, which is from Venator Materials. And Mark, it'd be great to get you to answer after Gemma as well. But the question is, how do we adjust selection practices to acknowledge and benefit from advancements? I'll say that again. How do we adjust selection practices to acknowledge and benefit from advancements in AI?
That's a great question, isn't it? I think we're definitely in a time now where traditional recruitment methods they don't work, and they're only fit for purpose in very sort of certain circumstances. And as TA recruitment professionals, we're all going through this really big transition of how do we change our processes to benefit the type of talent that we're looking for. And we're not always looking for experience, we're looking for skills, we're looking for potential. And that's where we're kind of adapting our processes. And then in the midst of all this, we've got all this brand new technology that is giving people perhaps an advantage over others when it comes to that competitive process. So particularly with sort of me and what we're doing within Siemens is we've really turned recruitment on its head, and we're looking at actually what do we need within the organization and how do we find that. So we've kind of stripped back those traditional approaches. So to give you a bit of an idea, you know, we've removed CVs. So they can't use ChatGPT to help with your CV because we don't have CVs.
Wow.
Yeah, and we've...
That's very interesting indeed. I don't know, Mark looks like he's like, oh, well, don't worry, Mark, I'll come to you in a second, panic not.
You know, we've implemented with Robert and Arctic Shores an assessment process whereby, you know, you can't use ChatGPT to answer those questions. And more recently, I took it a step further within my own team and actually provided all of the interview questions for recruitment into TA up front. So let's give people an absolute advantage in the process, and let's talk to them and dig deeper into the skills and the potential that they have to bring to the organisation, rather than relying purely on kind of their experience and their answers.
I love that. Brilliant. Mark, would you agree?
Gemma's story is fantastic. I think what they're doing at Siemens is a really good example of how switching to recruiting for potential rather than relying on experience or education is a way of leading to some really successful shifts in the metrics. It doesn't work for every job necessarily, because technical skills, the higher up the organization you go, can become a little bit harder, but with a proper build strategy of training, you can overcome it that way as well. And I know Siemens do a really good job with that. I think it's really interesting because there's two ways of looking at it from our perspective. And, you know, I talk now about recruitment agencies, right? Filling jobs for multiple employers. Fact number one is that most employers still expect a CV, and wherever we tend to go, the experience and knowledge is conflated with potential to succeed, right? Just because someone says they've done something before doesn't mean they're actually good at it. And it's a challenge that I think everybody faces everywhere. But Gen AI is allowing us to help candidates, for example, by getting their CV into a good standardized format. It's helping us to search for candidates because it's able to pass that data and to use it to our advantage to find candidates with certain qualities that employers are looking for. So generative AI makes talent acquisition a richer place by getting the right information into the systems that have been begging for good data for years. But secondly, I think, you know, for candidates themselves, I think it offers them a really good way of giving a good account of themselves, potentially when they wouldn't before. Okay, it replaces what was a long time ago those career coaches that you would pay money to go and see, and they would dress up your CV and make you look good and help you through a recruitment process. Well, now Gen AI can do that, and it's a lot more affordable. But equally, as Robert's data shows, it's also creating still a bit of a technology gap, those who can versus those who can't, those who get the good version versus those who can't. So it has to democratize. but let me try and answer Venator's question a bit more carefully here. I think selection practices, both on the recruiter side and the candidate side, can take advantage of generative AI. And I think everybody can win and everybody can benefit. It makes us all smarter. But at the same time, you have to do it with an eye for detecting when something isn't genuine, when something's a distortion. And to round back to the cheating question, I think it's cheating when what you land with isn't the truth. If experience is made up, tell me about a time when you've done something and it's just fake, right? So I think we have to be really careful about how it's used. I think there's an element of caution amongst the universal enthusiasm that we should all have for it.
Oh, that's made me, I've got a real ooh moment there, which leads us very nicely into the next question, which we'll head to Martin for next for this one. This is from Apex Hotels, and it's, so how do we spot where the function has been used? I mean, that's a hugely broad question, isn't it, Martin? But do you have thoughts on sort of, yeah, how do we spot it? How do the regular people looking at applications and CVs think, hold on, I think Gen AI has been used here? What can they look out for, Martin?
It's a great question. Let's go through that really, because there are technology vendors out there that are peddling their wares and saying that they can detect within a 98% accuracy whether ChatGPT is used within an application, and with all due respect to those vendors, that's a load of rubbish. Mincing my words there a little bit, but ultimately, so just to give a background to that. OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, launched a text classifier, and a text classifier is what we use to classify whether text has been generated by AI or not. They launched that in January. 5 weeks after ChatGPT was launched, they launched their own text classifier. At launch, they advised themselves that it was only 26% accurate, and they were never able to get it any better than that. And actually, in July, they very quietly closed that down and stopped offering their text classifier. Because it just wasn't, it wasn't, as good as they hoped. So if OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, can't actually, within a high level of accuracy, determine whether or not a piece of text has been created by their own technology, then vendors within our space can't either, as far as I'm concerned. There's actually simple prompting that you can inject into text to actually break those. And as an example, if you put the American Constitution into a text classifier, it will come out and say it's been created by AI. So either they're not accurate, or we've got some great time travelers in our world. So technologically, there's no real way. And the challenge we have within our industry is making decisions. Ultimately, we're always run at risk from a regulatory perspective and also from an ethical perspective, that when we're making a decision on somebody based on something that a machine tells us, we run a legal risk ultimately, because it's in breach of the GDPR. So to answer it, there really isn't a 100% risk-free way of spotting whether or not ChatGPT has been used to create text, unless it starts with something like in this fast-moving world of engineering, or kind of Gemma's case. So because ChatGPT loves talking about fast-moving worlds, so those kind of things are always going to there, and really it should open up a conversation between you and the candidate. It shouldn't just be you going, I think they've cheated, so I'm going to push them out of the process. It should be a conversation to say, have you used it? We don't see it as an issue. We just like to know from an open and transparency perspective whether or not you've used it. So that's my thought process. I mean, my advice is you can't. Yes, and that's why you need to ultimately change the way that you assess people.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And it comes back, Gemma, as well, to your point about not using CVs, so removing from part of the process an element that could be created with Gen AI. Do you have any other thoughts to follow on from that, Gemma, about sort of how do we spot where the function has been used?
Yeah, I think really, really technical answer there. That was amazing. I think if I look at typical examples that we've had within Siemens, where we use maybe some kind of application-based questions in replacement of a CV, you can very clearly see where the answers are very, very similar. So they've absolutely used some sort of generative AI, to formulate those answers. And that's okay. That's absolutely fine. They've used some intuition. It's not an issue. But as we move through the recruitment process, we've got such robust measures of when we talk to our candidates, the questions that we answer, that we can dig deeper into that. So on the face of it, they might get through an initial sift, but when it comes to the actual interview, that's when we start to get into the detail. So as Martin said, you know, we can't completely get rid of that. We don't know if people have used it. We probably assume they have, and we've got a good inkling. But it's the actual recruitment process itself that needs to be really, really good to identify the candidates we need. Brilliant.
And that you raise a good point there in terms of CVs in particular, which leads us on to our next pre-submitted question from EY Resourcing. And Robert, I'll go to you for this one first of all. What are some strategies to check for identical CVs?
Well, when I saw this question, I thought it was such an interesting one, because EY have very specifically said on their career website that the use of Gen AI in the application process is forbidden. It's something that they don't want candidates to do, and so you have that just sort of interesting perspective that if you don't then want them to use it, then okay, how are you going to spot it? And then you come back to Martin's point that he's just made, which is it's not really accurate around this. And I actually like, you go to UCAS, for example, because again, I think we can learn from other people from this. You know, the mad thing is if we're trying to reinvent the wheel when education has been through this. But if you go to the UCAS website, you can see very specifically, they've given advice. This is good use of AI, and this is counterproductive use of AI. And I actually think that's the guidance you need to give. And one final point I had when you're saying, you know, that here's some guides, here's some principles, and it's back to Gemma's point, which is, you know, use Gen AI, but don't just copy and paste. You've got to bring in, you know, your element and expertise and differences and strengths into the application. But I heard from one university professor who was setting questions for his students, and he said, look, here's the essay question you need to do, and by the way, I plugged it into ChatGPT and this is what came out, so don't give me this. What I need to see, by all means use it as a reference, but I'm going to need to see your individual perspective on this, and I will be looking to see how you have put in some of your own research and your own input to it. And I think that's the question that, or the response we need to be doing, because if we just go to the detect, we'll end up with what Martin has. And I think, you know, I'd be horrified if you as an employer saying, oh, I've just screened this person out because the detection tool said that this was cheating, when in fact they hadn't cheated, and that they were, or even worse, that they were neurodivergent and they were using it just to help support an application. You know, you don't want to be taking that phone call from somebody saying you've accused me of cheating and I wasn't.
Absolutely. Mark, I see you nodding there. So do you have further thoughts on that in terms of this sort of identical CVs in particular? I think, I mean, sort of, do you have experience of seeing this? Have you ever seen this, Mark, where two CVs come in and you think, hold on a minute,
not
what's
that I can say
here?
It's been a long time since I was a recruiter, and way back then, no, all the CVs mercifully looked different. But I think it is a really a big risk, and I think we do start to hear from some recruiters that where you've got pockets of generative AI being used, candidates are starting to look a little bit samey. It might not be identical, but it might be incredibly similar because generative AI structures things in certain ways, uses certain words. Martin, you know, you illustrated the fast-moving world of technology. I'm personally trying an AI tool out now which responds to my emails for me. It asks everybody if they're well. I don't want to know that, but it does it. So you can tell like a generative AI email comes from me because I hope you're well. And recruiters are starting to spot it. Martin, you say that, you know, it's hard to tell if something is fake or not. I think recruiters are getting a feel for it, interestingly. But in terms of how you mitigate against it, technology, I think, is probably the only way. That is something that sits in your applicant tracking system, some sort of back-end checking technical solution that can flag if a piece of text exists somewhere else in the database.
Hello. Sorry if that was me that
Yes.
disappeared. I'm not quite sure what happened there. But
I think hopefully it was just you,
Jenny.
Jenny.
Yes.
Hopefully.
It was just me. My full apologies there. Brilliant. Well, thank you. Sorry, apologies for that. I am back. It's funny, isn't it? Because the next two questions on our list they follow on from that in terms of, so we've kind of had, people applying, people using the function perhaps to create elements of a CV, elements of an application. And then from Diageo, we have here, how do we still ensure that we're moving the best talent through a recruitment process? Whether or not they're using Gen AI, how do we still ensure that we're moving the best people towards that interview stage? Gemma, do you have any thoughts on that one?
For me, that probably goes back to the steps in the recruitment process. So have you got kind of a multi-stage recruitment process? So are you the type of organisation that goes from your applications through your initial sift to straight to face-to-face interview? Or are you implementing something else that further sifts down your candidate base? So for Siemens, and I'm sure there's many other organisations that experience this, the effect of Gen AI, but also because of the brand reputation that we have, we receive thousands and thousands of applications for each position, and it is a volume nightmare for my team. So we've got many steps that are implemented to help with that sifting process. Made even more difficult by the fact that we have no CVs for many of our roles. So how do we get through that? So we've implemented sifting questions, and we'll review a very small number of questions to then sift out our candidates. But then we've got an Arctic Shores assessment where we're looking at how does our candidate score in terms of a fit profile that's built for this particular role. So it's about, how do you progress the candidates through the right steps to make sure that that final selection is the perfect fit for what your hiring manager wants to see when you get to that face-to-face interview stage.
Fantastic. Brilliant. And it kind of leads us on to, and I think, Robert, you're probably going to love this question too. Isn't the individual who can harness the power of AI the one you need in your business? Robert, over to you for that one. Is this not a tool that people can use this in applications? Surely you want them on your teams. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that discussion with various different people, and I think you're absolutely right. When we're even seeing jobs now for prompt engineers out there, so you definitely want that skill within the organization. And as every company starts embracing generative AI, you want it to be part of the the basic curriculum as well. So I do think we're going to have to to find ways of even assessing people's prompt engineering skills. I mean, I think that may even become, we have a technical test at the moment for, are you good at Scala or Python? We might well have one around prompt engineering skills. And I think what's sort of quite interesting in our early research on this, I remember the first time one of my data scientists came to me and explained that there are 5 different types of prompt engineering approaches that you could take.
Wow.
And that really surprised me, because the general discussion was, don't you just ask ChatGPT a question? And then it's a bit like Excel and just using the basic arithmetic in there, and then you suddenly realize, there's formulas and pivot tables and all sorts of cool things that you can do with Excel. And that's exactly true of Gen AI. And so we're gonna and I think most companies want to embrace that people can show and demonstrate those skills, because we want them to be in taking that into the organization. And it becomes part of this mindset, really, which is, how do we encourage and build this into the process and say, yeah, it's great if you want to use it like Gemma, you want to use it, that's brilliant, but here is good use, here is bad use, or counterproductive use, because I don't think it's necessarily bad. And that's the kind of exciting thing, that I think if we get to that mindset approach, then we leverage the power of what Gen AI and the people with the skills offer.
Very much so. And Martin, same question to you there. Isn't the individual who can harness the power of AI the one you need in your business? She says slightly cryptically.
just to expand on what Robert was saying, absolutely. But what we have to remember is that the reason why ChatGPT was it just exploded the use of AI and made AI kind of sexy overnight, is the fact that the layperson was able to start interacting with technology that's been around for years, large language models. And they were able to do that through natural language conversation, through a chat prompt, ultimately, a chat interface. And what that's led on to is a systematic change in how we're going to start expecting to interact with the technology around us. So as Satya Nadella said back in, I think it was March, that just as we're used to using computers with keyboards and a mouse and a touch screen, the future of computing is interacting through a natural language prompt. And so ultimately, if we want people to be productive in the use of technology moving forward through the future of employment and world of work, we need to have people in our business who are comfortable and confident with interacting with technology through natural language interfaces, ergo prompting. It's not as technical as prompt engineering. It's about knowing how to have a conversation with a machine, ultimately. And that's a lot of the work that I do, in my business. I help upskill people in that kind of thought process. But ultimately, we need people in the future of our organizations who can very, very quickly become productive using technology through having natural language conversations with it.
Fantastic. Very, very interesting. And that, I guess the flip side of the people who are all using this to be applying, as we say, we've got the CVs and then recruiters looking at those CVs. We then jump to interview stage. And this question's for you, Gem. It's from TUI Limited Resourcing. And it's how can ChatGPT or Gen AI influence providing interview questions prior to interviews? So if we think of the people interviewing, what areas is that there for? How can it influence interview questions?
So I've actually used ChatGPT to write some interview questions, interestingly. And I just I used a standard deck of mine, and I thought I'm going to put it in there and see what it comes back with. It wasn't quite what I wanted, but it gave me a bit of a different steer. But I'm trialing at the moment providing interview questions up front. And I know it's a bit of a contentious topic, and some people really like it, some people don't, and there's many arguments to and against this. But my view on this is interviews are stressful enough as it is. So why don't we make it a little bit nicer? And I can give you the interview questions in advance. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to come up with the perfect answer. And even if you pop that into generative AI, is it going to generate the right answer that I'm looking for? Probably not. No, because it's all very situational and it's kind of iterative to the individual organization, our values, and what I'm looking for in a candidate. But I mean, I think you kind of get it by now. I'm a big advocate of ChatGPT. I use it every day. I use it for pretty much everything, just as a way of making my job a bit easier. So if it can help make the recruitment process easier as well, and also help applicants and candidates in that process, why not? Let's go for it.
Fantastic. That's so exciting. I love that. I'm sure people will be really, really intrigued to hear that, and I'm sure you won't be the only person who's doing that as well. So over to you, Mark. I'm going to jump through. We've got a list of questions here, but I'm aware of the time for everybody, and there's one in particular that I think follows on from that, and because it's about both sides. So we've kind of had the candidate, the application, the interview, potential interview process. The question for you here, Mark, next is from Scoff's group, and it's how does it mask the candidate's true potential? So I guess from both sides there, and you mentioned earlier about the idea of, if it says something that's completely untrue or not really about the person, that's masking the potential, I guess. But are there other ways where this can mask a candidate's true potential, which can often be a negative for the applicant and the recruiter?
Yes, it can. And I think that question goes back to several points that we've discussed throughout this panel, actually, which is it cheating? How do you move the right talent forward in the recruitment process? And now, is this masking a candidate's potential? Are we getting false positives? That is, candidates who look really good but aren't because they've used Gen AI to push themselves forward. And are we missing good talent who haven't used generative AI just to give their application that bit of polish and magic that gets us through our sifting stages, right? So there's two potential risks that come with this. Does it mask potential? Yes, possibly. And I think the key message here, which we've seen from across the panel as well, is that when we're looking at how a recruitment process is working, sifting will always be sifting. There will always be killer questions. There will always be things that we need to do. We will always need to do good interviews. And by the way, we're using Gen AI. We're looking at that now to do exactly the same thing, give recruiters better interview questions to ask. But crucially, this world of assessment that I've been in for 15 years, Robert's been in, well, forever, I guess, and Siemens are really pushing forward with now. All of this world of assessment, we have been saying for years that gathering objective data on your candidates, which is resilient to cheating in whatever way that may be, has a valuable place in a recruitment process. With generative AI distorting everything else, CVs, cover letters, interview responses, the role that assessment can play as a vital and critical part of getting authentic data on a candidate, the role it plays is so much stronger than ever before. The business case for assessment, full stop, is probably as strong as I've ever seen it, given this climate that we're now in.
Wow, that's powerful. That's really
honestly,
powerful
and it feels good. It feels good because we've been saying it for years, and people go, "No, yeah, but but the yeah buts, you're running out of excuses now, surely."
Ooh, I like it. Definitely not on the fence there. Definitely not on the fence.
No, absolutely not.
I'm going to, for our final question, which is coming from Resourcing in Cancer Research UK, I'll ask you quickly, Martin, because I suspect you might even have a very clear stat answer, and then we'll jump to Robert to finish and conclude for the session for Arctic Shores. What is the percentage of candidates now utilising ChatGPT/Gen AI?
Great question. I mean, there's so many different pieces of research out there, but most pieces of research that have been published show that it's heading north of 50% now. Mm-hmm. So what we're not talking about is people who are using online tools like Lazy Apply or Apply AI or any of those kind of tools. We're talking about people that are just using it to tweak their CV, tweak a cover letter, those kind of things. It's heading north of 50% now.
Wow. Very far north? Or are we just nudging over the 50, do you think?
Just nudging over. The last piece of research I saw was just over 50%. So, I mean, there are, as we know, there are, tens, hundreds, millions of CV of applications happening on a daily basis. So it's a really difficult piece of research to do, but every piece of research is showing now that it's starting to edge over the 50%.
Wow, very interesting. So it's part of what's happening. It's part of recruitment. It's part of applications.
Yes.
It's part of it all. There's no escaping that now. Yeah.
No, not at all. Not at all. It is here, and there's no point in putting your head in the sand. We need to deal with it.
Gotcha. Brilliant. And Robert, back over to you. Thank you so much for leading the session in the first instance. And do you have thoughts on that 50%? Have you seen anything different to that, either through Arctic Shores or things that you've noticed? And I'd love it if you would sort of conclude for us for this session.
Sure, Jenny. Well, I just want to thank Martin, Mark, and Gemma for making this a really interesting panel and giving some different perspectives, and also I think some really helpful guidance and thoughts as to how to tackle some of these things. And just back to your first point about the number of candidates using it, it is going up hugely. And by the time we redid this 6 months down the line, it'll be 75%, because everybody realizes that this is, and it goes back to Martin's point, that it's conversation. It's so easy to use, which is why my analogy, it's like a calculator. Why would you not use a calculator? I look at my kids now, and they sort of dismay as I go through my mental arithmetic to go and work out what change I want. I say, Dad, why don't you just use your phone? Because that is just how the next generation have moved on, and I think it'll be exactly the same with Gen AI on this. And if people do, and I hope people have found this interesting, if they do one thing either later today or tomorrow morning, is to go and look at their career websites and think about how do we give guidance. Because Martin, I'm completely with you on this. We can't just ignore it, and I think it's completely unfair to candidates to not actually start giving them some guidance as to whatever your position is as to what good looks like and what counterproductive looks like using Gen AI, because leaving candidates to work it out means that some people will get advantage and some people will be left behind, and that would be a really sad result of something which should be positive for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a challenge for everyone who's been in the webinar, everyone who's watching on catch up. Have a look at your careers site and be involved, see what's really going on, and be informed and aware. Wonderful. Thank you, Robert, Mark, Gemma, Martin. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you all so much for joining us today for the webinar.
Thanks very
Pleasure.
much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.